Welcome to the worker induction. Over the next few slides, we're going to cover off on the main points of each HR policy, and at the end we will then show you how to access all of these HR policies on the QR system. This slide gives a bit of a rundown what we're going to cover off over the next 20 to 30 minutes. Keeping in mind these HR policies will be more of an overarching side of it. So risk management, incident and reporting, fitness for work, drugs and alcohol, harassment, bullying and discrimination, code of conduct, manual tasks, heat exposure, vehicle use, electronic media, dress code, confidentiality, training, how the workers access the HR policies, domestic and family violence, inclusion and diversity, physiological health, suicide, and self-harm prevention. Risk management is probably one of the biggest topics and the most confused. To simplify this particular one, we talk about hazards and risks and understanding the definition of what that means and how everything that we do in the workplace really does center around risk management. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a hazard versus a risk. A hazard has anything with the potential to cause harm to life, health, environment, or property, whereas risk is your likelihood or your consequence. So your risks are things like slips, trips, falls, dehydration, knocks, bumps, cuts, all that stuff. Whereas a hazard is something like poor housekeeping, an open edge, rusted pallet racking, anything like that that has the potential to cause harm, whereas the risks then are the consequence. The 5-point process in risk management really talks around about identifying the hazards in the task that you're doing, and then obviously acknowledging that there's risks involved in each of those hazards. Then you decide on some control measures. Once you've decided on the control measure that you're going to use, you then implement that control measure. So that's the 4th point, is implementing. And then the 5th one is monitoring and reviewing, having a look at what control measures you've put in place and making sure that they're still effective. Hierarchy of control centers around those activities and categories for the control measures that you're using. Elimination being the most effective, not doing the task, which isn't always practical. Substitution, isolation, engineering, administration, and then least of all, PPE. SWIMs versus risk assessments. The only real difference between a SWIM and a risk assessment is the fact that a SWIM is a document that Workplace Health and Safety Queensland require when you do any high-risk activities. So when you're conducting those high-risk activities, a SWIMS document has more legal jargon in there, ABN, company address, location, and owner of the document. There's a few more things that need to be put in there other than just assessing the risk. Incident reporting is very important, and to make it as simple as possible, we've come up with this system here. You'll notice in front of you there's some QR documents. These are examples of some stickers that may be on your site. These QR codes can be scanned by your phone, and when you scan them, you'll notice one of the first things that comes up is it asks you either for a code or it says, would you like to report an incident? All you do is you click report an incident and you follow through those bouncing ball into doing that, and that comes through to us. The 4 types of incidents that we discuss for you is your hazards, so anything with the potential to cause harm. Then we have near misses, something's happened but nobody was hurt and nothing was damaged. An accident where something was damaged that has financial value to it. And then an injury, so somebody's been hurt and they need to physically stop work to address that injury. So to report the incidents, you would scan the QR code, click report an incident, follow the bouncing ball as far as entering your details and hit submit. That comes through to our team. Our team will then finish the incident report for you and then contact you if we need any further information. Obviously, you're still reporting to your supervisor, always reporting any type of incident to your supervisor. The QR system is just more of a formal way of letting us know so that we can then continue on the process. Fit for work means different things to different people, but ultimately being fit for work is at your best and able to do the tasks that you're given without injury or any other sort of inability to do the task. So fit for work talks about obviously coming to work well rested, not under the influence of any drugs or alcohol, injury free in that sense. Can you come to work if you're not fit for work? In some cases you may be able to, but for any reason why you may not be fit for work, you need to let your supervisor know so they can make that call, whether they put you on light duties or just find tasks that are suitable to you. The physiological health section is broken down into 4 main points. It can be a bit daunting, but the basics are the commitment to the physiological health, where the company is dedicated to promoting the mental well-being and preventing physiological harm, doing this through continuous improvement in the work practices. We having supportive environments and mental health initiatives. Some of the strategies for the improvement of that would be a company focus on actions to enhance physiological health. We prevent mental health issues, obviously through communication and talking, and manage identified disorders by providing support, training, and resources. So making these available to you as much as possible. The physiological risk assessment really it's an ongoing regular assessment that helps identify any organizational factors that may impact employees' well-being. This has a focus on implementing preventative and protective measures at the organizational level, really looking at the staff and their behaviors and what's actually going on, and then documenting that and making an action plan. The last would be any sort of supportive work environment, so the resources that we have here. The company does have a culture of physiological safety, meaning that they respect and have a balanced approach to it, ensuring that all employees are supported, recognized, and involved in the decisions that affect their work and well-being. And that could be something as simple as shifting an office space or to different direction in the company. So just making sure that is more inclusive. Our next section is suicide and self-harm prevention. We have 4 main points that we sort of break this into. The first one being the commitment to prevention. We're dedicated to preventing suicide and self-harm through evidence-based procedures, regular reviews, and appropriate staff training. It's incredibly important that it's identified who will need this training, obviously senior management and supervisors, to be able to obviously identify it. The next sort of covering off would be our legal and ethical obligations as a company. We adhere to all relevant health and safety, privacy, any anti-discrimination laws, and we ensure that the safe and supportive work environment is maintained with special attention to mental health. Suicide prevention principles is a section inside of that covers off all the signs of suicide or self-harm and obviously the wanting to do either of them. It's taken seriously with timely actions. Through appropriate staff training, collaboration with any external professionals might also be necessary to involve, depending on the size of the organization and the internal expertise. And then the last thing would be the immediate response to any sort of evidence that's been presented to management. If there's any immediate risk, obviously management would be notified immediately. Appropriate precautions would be taken and the individual wouldn't be left alone. Other responses then would be relevant to the severity of the evidence provided. The drug and alcohol policy covers off on pretty much exactly what you expect it to, drugs and alcohol. But to be more specific in the drug category, it's not just illegal drugs that is covered off in this policy. We do also talk about prescription medication, specifically medication that can cause nausea or drowsiness. In the construction industry, we are around a lot of machinery and moving plant, so it's important that if you have any medication that can cause you to be quite drowsy, that you inform your supervisor as soon as possible. So you do have an obligation to let your supervisor or manager know that you're on any type of medication that could cause drowsiness. Don't have to tell why. If you are on that medication, you need to let them know. It does sort of fall into that fit for work category again. It's why we talk about this straight after that. Drug testing is something that an employer has the right to conduct if they've got reasonable cause. They can't target individuals without proper cause. However, they can run drug testing at any point in time. If you decide that you do not wish to participate in a drug or alcohol test, that's fine. They can't force you to do that. The legislation then talks about a positive result by refusal. So it's just something to be mindful of. that these are the things that the course of action. Smoking is also covered off in the drug and alcohol policy, mainly talking about smoking in designated areas, not smoking in company vehicles, and if you're transporting other staff in your own personal vehicle, not smoking while they're in there as well, because it is a workplace for them. The harassment, bullying, and discrimination policy is probably one of the larger ones, and probably the most misunderstood in the industry here in Queensland. Main forms, I guess, would be talking about your new people coming into a workplace, the hazing that tends to happen in the construction industry, asking people to get box of grinding sparks and things like that. It's being less and less, I'm finding, in the industry where people are being asked to do stuff like that. It still is around there, and a lot of people have a bit of a chuckle. But it's just more about understanding the crowd that you're with, and that if somebody asks you not to do something, or if you get a sense that they don't enjoy it, you need to stop doing it immediately. One of the biggest things I talk about is your intent is irrelevant. It's exactly how that person perceives it. If they are offended or if they're upset by your actions, that's all that matters. The fact that you didn't mean to upset them isn't something that's ever taken into consideration. Another thing to think about as well with this particular is the exposure to the public. A lot of tasks that we can do in the construction industry especially is a lot of public around and can hear. So even though you might have a particular banter with a set of colleagues or friends, that you can be saying things that aren't well perceived by the public. And so just being mindful that when you're around new people or people that can hear your conversation, that while you're at work, that you've got to be very mindful of the things that you say that can be construed as harassment. Even if it's not directed to somebody, they have the complete right to be offended on behalf of somebody else as well. So again, your intent is irrelevant in those particular cases. Inclusion and diversity can mean different things to different people. The commitment to inclusion and diversity here at the company talks about the dedication to ensuring the workplace values equity, fairness, and respect for all, eliminating any discrimination and creating a culture of well-being and inclusion. Now, the responsibilities and the principles are shared by both management and employees. The responsibility to promote an inclusive environment, embracing a diversity in backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives, and integrating these principles into all aspects of the workforce and workplace. When we talk about recruitment and the work environment itself, the company itself will be committed to attracting and retaining a diverse range of talent. This ensures fair treatment and providing opportunities for career progression, flexible work arrangements, and a harassment-free environment. And then finally, when we talk about continuous improvement, understanding that we regularly measure and monitor diversity goals, talking to the staff and employees, providing education and training on unconscious bias, and ensuring that diversity and inclusion are really an integral part of the company's culture and the practices that we have. Domestic and family violence is something that is getting a lot more spoken about, and it's important that we do cover it off separately from any sort of bullying and harassment. We talk about the commitment to a safe workplace, and that's being dedicated to providing a safe working environment, recognizing that domestic and family violence can affect the employees, not only your attendance, your performance, and the safety. We talk about support and confidentiality. So it's incredibly important that employees not only be told this, but believe it, that the employees affected by domestic and family violence have the right to confidentiality. They can seek support through flexible working arrangements, leave options, and other workplace accommodations. So the responsibilities themselves are shared again by management employees. It's important that we all promote a violence-free workplace. We participate in relevant training and provide sensitive support to those affected by domestic and family violence. And then the last to sort of tie that together would be the response and the flexibility. The company itself will respond promptly and appropriately to employees affected by domestic violence, offering flexible work arrangements and ensuring their safety at work. Code of conduct sits quite nicely after the previous slide for obvious reasons. It does talk about an employee's obligation and the responsibility for your own conduct. That I didn't mean for it, or it's not my responsibility type of comments that we've heard. It's irrelevant. You have responsibility for your own actions. You must obviously behave in a manner that is acceptable and respectable to not only your workers but the public around you, and the ability for an organization to take disciplinary action for those that don't meet those obligations. It's something that it's never evident until it's right in front of you. So just be mindful that the code of conduct is quite serious, and we do take it very seriously. Manual tasks is a pretty straightforward one. Most people have had some form of manual handling training, or at least understand that manual handling tends to be pushing, pulling, or doing anything that requires you to physically do it. The most common injury that we see is due to poor housekeeping. So somebody's lifting something, they're carrying something, so they're manual handling, and then they trip on something, usually due to poor housekeeping, leads, rubbish, tools, all that kind of stuff laying around the ground. Difficult lifts are another one. So it might not necessarily be heavy, it's just an awkward shaped item that has to be sort of fed through doorways without damaging walls. And then you're talking about hazardous manual handling tasks. Those are those repetitive, awkward positions, vibration, sudden shift, or high force. So those are tasks that workplace health and safety have deemed hazardous, and when people perform those tasks tend to cause severe back injuries or musculoskeletal injuries, as they tend to refer to them. And one of the biggest things that we can talk about then in this is buddy lifts and getting help, even though something's not overly heavy, just getting some assistance to lift those off of vehicles and whatnot. Parking vehicles closer to the work sites, trying your best to use assisted lifts like dollies and trolleys and things like that is also going to help from that side of things. So it's not just about good manual handling technique, which is definitely a part of that, but in manual tasks, those are the things that we talk about. The heat exposure policy rightfully sits on its own. Being up here in North Queensland, it's pretty much hot all year round. Depending on the task that you're doing, can be exacerbated by confined areas, whether you're near a sheet of tin under a roof, not getting any breeze. But the dry heat up here can really be quite painful in the winter months even, and then all the way through to the humid heat that we get here in the summer. One of the biggest things is obviously getting shade and covering up, drinking lots of water. We say it all the time that electrolytes are great and all these forms of cooling yourself down, but if you're not drinking enough water, that tends to be the main thing that brings people down with heat stress. Understanding the signs and symptoms of heat stress as well, that nausea, vomiting, dizziness, clammy skin, all that stuff is really important, not just for yourself, but for other workers around, and especially for apprentices who aren't familiar with the signs. So just keeping an eye on them and making sure that you're taking mini breaks, whether it's a minute or 2 minutes in the shade, taking regular water drinks and wetting your head and stuff like that to try to cool down is very, very important as well. Vehicle policy is there specifically for company work vehicles, but it does cover off when you drive your own personal vehicle for work purposes and or other machinery that you might use from time to time at the workplace. When it comes to parking vehicles, a lot of workers don't realize that any traffic fines or parking fines are yours. And so the only place you can park are designated parking areas. If you're in an area where the driveway that you're potentially going to be parking on is full, then you may need to park down the street and walk. Just because the area that's right adjacent to where you're working isn't available doesn't allow you to park on the verge. So the councils can fine you for that, and they have done in the past. So just be mindful that those fines are your fines and to park appropriately. Electronic media policy covers off mainly for use of personal electronic media during work hours. Your organization may have its own social media, and that's not really what this one is talking about. It's more about your own personal use of a mobile phone or a computer or a tablet, whatever you've been given. So social media, some examples that are pretty common are Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and whatnot. But a lot of people don't realize that social media is anything where you can communicate with others on your device. Messenger, text messaging, own personal emails, stuff like that is also classified as social media. So your times that you can access these devices and or social media platforms is in your own break time, after work hours and before work, not during work hours. Your employer, your supervisor has every right to ask you to put your phone away while you're at work, especially in the construction industry. There's a lot of things that you don't want to be distracted from, and so that's why this particular policy exists. The next one we're going to discuss is the dress code. Inside the dress code, it's pretty standard. When you're given a uniform, keep it clean and neat. No rips, no tears. If they are, just report them and get a new uniform. If you're wearing your own clothing, not wearing any offensive slogans or any sort of vulgar language on the clothing, you are representing the company when you're wearing this. If you're provided any PPE, like glasses or gloves, that you wear them correctly. Longs may be required inside a specific area. Anytime you're in a workshop, ensure that you're wearing clear safety glasses, not tinted inside the workshops. The confidentiality policy really does cover off on any sort of information you might be privy to working in your workplace, whether it's a contract for a new client or it's a particular price that your team charges out for a set item. It could be anything from a workplace injury. It could be anything from a new product that your company is going to be selling and or producing. You have an obligation that if you're privy to this information to not discuss it with people outside the organization. Likewise, too, if you're given devices that has some of this information on there, you do have an obligation to make sure that you lock these devices. So if it's a tablet, making sure that it's turned off or locked, that they're not left open inside the cabs of trucks. A lot of order books and stuff like that can be left open on the windshield of a truck, things like that. So you do have an obligation to make sure that you protect that information as much as reasonably practicable. Your training policy will cover off on some of the terminology that we'll be using in your employment, things like licenses, competencies, and VOCs, and understanding what the differences are of them. Competencies tend to be given to you on the day to deem that you are competent. They're given by somebody who themselves is competent. So like a working at heights course, you would sit that course, and at the end of that course be given a certificate that says that you're competent on today. They tend to be accepted as relevant for anywhere from a year to 3 years, depending on how long you use that activity and are working in that particular craft. Another tool then that would be thrown into there would be a VOC, which is a verification of competency. So if an employer wanted to deem you still competent after a number of years, they could then get an individual come and watch you do your task and then issue a verification of competency. Competencies are technically only valid on the day. That's what they're saying, is that on this day you are competent. So it really is up to the individual to remain competent and what they do as far as formal training or just on-the-job training. Licenses are a little bit different. They're issued. So things like a driver's license or a high-risk work license, they need to be renewed. There generally is some form of competency and some level of training with those. However, they then issue those, and it's the obligation of the employee to maintain those licenses. So if you need a license for your workplace, like for example, a high-risk work license for forklifts, and you don't renew that license, that's the obligation of the employee to make sure that that is renewed and in date. So if you do lose any competencies, you need to let your employer know as soon as possible, obviously, because you need to be competent and trained and licensed to do a lot of the tasks. So you may be asked to produce those licenses, even a driver's license, every year, and that's just your employer's way of ensuring that you still hold that license. Your access to your policies will be on these type of QRs. You would have seen these earlier on in the slides. These are QR codes that you can scan with your phone. If you want to grab your phone out now, you can scan them. You'll see a code there as well. Some workplaces might not have a code to put on theirs, and that's fine. They just scan the QR code and you go straight into it. However, if yours has a code, just key that number in. When you scan that, you'll notice it goes to a landing page that has a few forms on there as well. Anything from an incident report form to a toolbox talk. We've already covered off on how to use those. However, if you type in that code that's on the screen here, that'll give you access to all your HR policies. We'll also put other documents inside of here as well, any sort of safe work method statements or site policies or procedures and whatnot. But if you scroll down to usually the bottom, you'll see your HR policies. If you click that, all the policies that we've just gone through in this whole PowerPoint will be covered off in there and more. If there's any that we haven't covered off specific to you in your company. If you have any questions, please feel free to give us a call. As I said, this is more the headlining points for these HR policies to show you them where they are, how to access them, and the main takeaway points. Feel free to read through to them. For example, in the bullying and harassment discrimination, there's a lot of good helplines inside of there too for self-help, and if people aren't feeling well, the Are You Okay and Beyond Blue and stuff. So feel free to click those links. You can provide any of this information to any family members or friends that need help as well. So they are free hotlines that people can access. But as always, if you have any questions, please give us a call. You'll see our number there on the screen, or flick us an email. Thanks a lot.